High Standoff, an intriguing presentation entitled The White Whales of Fraud and Where to Find Them by Timur Yunusov. Good day, my name is Timur Yunusov. I'm Head of Offensive Security Research at Cyber R&D Lab, and my today's presentation is entitled The White Whales of Fraud and Where to Find Them. Obviously, we are going to talk to you about frauds with credit cards and banking cards. Banks allegedly know everything about fraud, how to find them, how to find fraud because they get money for accumulating somebody else's funds rather than losing them. But I've worked closely with various banks and analyzed securities of ATMs, POS terminals, and the like. And little by little, you realize how banks actually work and how banking financial system works. I'd like to voice those rules. Worry only if it affects masses. Second rule, count your money. These two rules can be described thanks to the risk model that banks make use of. Risk model teaches financial institutions, stipulates it's not important whether your customer loses money. The most important thing is it big money? And how much does it cost to protect yourself from this risk? If the cost of protecting from risks is overly high, then this risk is grounded. And you don't have to combat it, mitigate it. And the third rule is take extra steps only after it will hit. This reactive approach follows from the first two rules quite nicely. A couple of interesting examples. Till the previous year, banks in the UK, when you would want to transfer money from one account into another one within the UK, you only had to mention the bank's code and the account number. Also, they would probably ask for the name of the end user and a reference, but banks wouldn't check the field name. In actual fact, you would be able to make use of any name. So the adversaries would use it. They would call users and say, your account is compromised. We should transfer your money for hackers not to steal them. So we just created a fresh account, so initiate payment, please. And they would name the account and only mention your name. And the victim would place their name in the field and the money would go to the adversaries. So this was a very frequent thing, a very frequent issue. Last year, one pensioner wanted to get money to buy a house, and £190,000 was sent to a wrong account, and it took him a while to get his money back because it was just a regular payment for the bank, and bank thought that he's making a legitimate transfer. So only after this huge scandal, like hundreds of years after financial institutions came into being, and dozens of years after the remote payment systems were introduced, the names of identify the user, the end user, is now used. Malware is oftentimes used with OTP. Back in 2017, a German-based bank encountered a rather complicated attack. When malware was on cell phones, they would take logins and passwords from there, and they would use SS7 attacks to get text messages and other important data. So it was an unusual case. Hackers made their best. It's not that it was overly difficult, by the way. And yet another case, we all know that we live in this very unexpected world of the pandemic. And the loan applications in the UK grew by 30% around so. So loan fraud, or as they call it, synthetic identity fraud, when hackers would create new instances for the purpose of getting loan application. And these loans are subsequently paid to somebody who never asked for this money and never saw this money, for that matter. So in the last 10 months, UK banks have lost around £60 million to this fraud. I don't have to tell you that, because you all know that, and banks know that. And banks do try to safeguard their users. When you enter online banking system, you have this message: please don't share this code with anybody, with those who would call you. Nobody would ask you to give them their accounts and passwords. But banks don't know, or they don't want you to know, about something that I call white whales of fraud. These are the cases that come out once every 5 to 10 years. They attract great attention, all in the media, all over the media. It's something that allows hackers to gain dozens of dollars, millions of dollars, or pounds, or euro. I'm going to talk about 4 of them, and they have to do with operations with credit cards. Probably this way I'm going to integrate you into this process. I don't see you, you don't interact with me, you can't interact with me, but I'm going to ask you questions, and I'll give you 5 to 10 seconds for you to think it over and probably answer me. And if your answer is right, it may make you happy, and dopamine will get right into your head, and it would be great. So case number 1. A couple of days ago, we wrote of Ingenica and Verifone terminals. This vulnerability allows, through physical or network access, plan access and clone cards, get PIN codes and magnet tape, and also carry out frauds like money laundering operations. Not too many companies or banks know of it. Only one company addressed us. Verifone and Ingenica pretend it's not happening, and they're totally intransparent, not facing their customers in this way. What's more interesting, that Ingenica and Verifone are saying that these terminals are end of life, have almost reached end of life. They are going out of the market. So you identified vulnerability in obsolete equipment. It's not interesting to us to patch it. I mean, they agreed to patch it, but priority of these challenges is really, 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 really low for them. My question is, how many old Verifone Varix devices are used in the world? I mean, the ones that will end their life cycle in 5 years. How many old Verifone Varix devices are used in the world? I had to dig to find answer to this question. According to my estimates, it's about around 7 million devices. Right now, 7 million devices keeps working on obsolete software, which means that in 5 years they are not disappearing, right? All of a sudden, they're going to keep working in third world countries for another 10 to 20 years. One other bad thing is that even for now, according to our estimates, 95% of the banks still use old, vulnerable hardware and software that contains all the above-mentioned vulnerabilities, and that would allow adversaries with physical or network access to compromised devices, leading to all the challenges and issues that I described earlier. Tesco Bank is my favorite example. In the year 2016 or 2017, they were hacked. The cyber attack happened right before Christmas. In 2-3 weeks, hackers stole 2.5 million pounds from Tesco Bank credit card owners. And it looked like the credit card owners had just a regular order of cards, so they would predict, the adversaries would predict expiry date. Expiry date and security code of Visa cards took them as little as 6 seconds. Security code was the only thing that was left, and bank wouldn't protect CVVs. So by brutal force attack, the hackers could easily get hold of CVV wherever 3D Secure is not used to. When it's switched off with Tesco Bank, or they would have an opportunity to make use of these cards in certain stores, internet stores. So that's what they did. That's exactly what they did. Tesco Bank had to switch off online acquiring all of it. In a month and a half, Newcastle researchers identified the vulnerability, realized it, and wrote a research about it. End of story. But the question is, how much Tesco Bank has actually lost? And the answer is 19 million pounds. Because last year, the state fined the bank was 16.5 million for not securing CVVs, for letting it all happen in 2016. So, according to our estimates, and we have about 50 cards of different banks from all over the world, from Europe, UK, Asia, Russia, at least 30% of the banks still allow CVV guessing, brute forcing. They do not block the cards after 50, 30, 100 transactions. And 20% of the banks still disclose valid PAN and expiry date. Like in the process of card activation or accounts activation in online bank, or restoring account for online banking, or when creating requests to return monetary funds. In this case, you don't have to enter CVV. Yet another interesting case, the so-called Brazilian attack that occurred in 2014 in Latin America and also in North America and in Canada. You probably know that America is rather slow in adapting and using chip cards and cards with NFC. They still use magnet tape and card not present. When card number, expiry date, and CVV is introduced and printed in, right now they're very slow. They're still very slow, and most probably then they were still living with magnet tape. And several banks announced that we know how to deal with chip operations. They started to give their customers chip operations and carry out chip transactions like any other European modern bank. But turns out those were not truly chip transactions. The card knew UMV protocol, but on the card emission side, they would take thread to equivalent. The field is a clone of magnet tape, and would just It wouldn't ever check PIN code or encryption or anything. So hackers learned about it, and they made use of cards that were stolen from Home Depot and 7-Eleven or something else. So they just bought those cards in dark market. They made use of the POS terminals from Brazil. That's why it's called Brazil attack. And they would send requests as if it were EMV chip-based transactions. And since these are high-priority transactions, anti-fraud systems never blocked them. So they stole several millions of dollars from various American banks, US banks. Took several years to research it. Brian Krebs described it at length. My question is, how much German OLB bank has lost last year after exactly same type of attack? 2019, Europe. No high tech in finance, right? 1.5 million euro, as much as 1.5 million euro. German OLB bank never checked cryptograms for transactions was cheap. They might have changed software and it would work in demo mode or something. Sounds crazy, but true. Worse than that, according to our statistics and experience, 95% of Visa and MasterCard cards have well-known, publicly described issues with cryptogram checking. We would write a lot of articles about that, and other security researchers would write about that. And yet, most banks ignore those. Last year, we had a research related Visa cards, contactless Visa cards. And we said that you don't have to know a PIN code if you want to have transactions below 3,000 rubles in Russia, 45 pounds in the UK, and even for chip-based transactions. Visa does not, almost never requires PIN code. This issue is because of the way EMV protocols work. Cambridge University specialist would write it back in 2009, and then a French bank was robbed and lost 68 million euro. But those attacks were about chip. And last year we told everybody about MFC attacks to contactless Visa card contactless. They was telling everybody that it's not a vulnerability, it's a feature. It was meant this way. Both MPS vendors, Visa and MasterCard, said that contactless NFC frauds has the lowest fraud rate, and that it only amounts 2.5 pennies per 100 pounds spent. But how much is that in absolute numbers? Because in absolute numbers, it would be around, well, according to various estimates, it would be around 1.5 and 2 million pounds. So this is how much British banks lose annually because of attacks of this kind. More often than not, those are lost and stolen cards when they would steal cards or find cards and make payments before the owner would block the card. So this figure is much bigger across the globe, obviously. And like I said, 90% of the banks still allow PIN-OK attack. It's 11 or 15 years old, and it's still there. And all Visa cards can be used without the PIN. PIN is not needed for Visa cards, and it's okay with Visa, it's okay with banks, it's okay with everyone, it looks like. Last year, I found a case when in Auchan hypermarket, a card owner they used offline PIN code in certain Auchans, and he changed PIN code. And it was an offline PIN code check, and he realized that he's introducing the old PIN code, and the transaction does happen. And this is your typical PIN OK attack. So the bank sees that a PIN code is entered incorrectly, but it still agrees the transaction. So this is how a PIN OK attack works. So all these titles don't change a thing. All these cases do happen. A lot of people are talking about it, but nothing is being done. Firstly, because financial institutions and banks are very, very regulated. They have PCI, payment card industry. We have STO requirements and all that. Besides, it's back and forth game when a meter bank says it's a problem of acquirer bank, and the acquirer bank goes back and says, no, 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 it's a meters bank problem. And all of them would go to payment card industry associations, to vendors of POS terminals or software producers for those POS terminals. And it's a game of placing blames and pointing fingers. So if you come to your bank with this story, or your security guy comes to risk people in your bank with this whole story, they would say, nothing to worry about. That's about silly American banks. One PIN-OK attack happened in banki.ru or bankir.ru something. Information security guys were saying, oh, stupid French banks allowed the loss of 680,000 euro because of this stupid attack. At the same time, Russian banks, the ones we checked, they also still have this same issue. So it's not surprising at all. And this whole idea that it's all about somebody else, it's not about our bank, it's just an illusion. But most importantly, well, we all know that banks don't sell safes. It's not what they sell. They sell trust, right? They don't sell accounts or safes or anything. They sell trust. So banks who were attacked like that, they lose this trust. I hear a lot of people who say, I don't want to be in Tesco Bank because I don't trust them. I don't feel I'm protected. So the bank's reputation costs much more. It's much more important than their bottom line and all the money it accumulates. So the problem is that regulators to punish banks so that everybody else sees it, to signal to the industry. So the matter is whether or not you want to be the next Tesco Bank or the next OLB Bank, or you would rather want everybody to want to be owner of your bank's card. So several rules in conclusion of my presentation. Know your enemy, like Sun Tzu would say, right? Then learn on somebody else's mistakes. Prepare for the worst, and finally, don't trust risk management. and risk management approach. And now, in greater details about these points. Well, you really need to understand your current state. Otherwise, it's very difficult to take subsequent decisions. If you don't understand whether or not this attack is probable for their system, their terminals, their cards, it's very difficult for them to make a step forward. So the first thing to do is to understand what is your current state. In terms of learning on somebody else's mistakes, there are very easy solutions for all the problems that I mentioned above. Visa and MasterCard would boast that they use machine learning to test all the cards that go through our system, that all have fraud protection. We make use of machine learning, and it's not easy to carry out fraudulent transactions. But there is always an easy way. You don't have to use machine learning. You don't have to employ artificial intelligence. There's this simple rule that says, do this, this, and that, A, B, and C, and then you'll be protected from this attack. And there's a bunch of technical means that effectively protect from the kinds of attack that I mentioned above. And there are also ways to compensate if this particular bank fails to introduce this A's, B's, and C's. And then a good rule of the last few years, don't trust your internal security team. You always may want to use red team tests. We do red team testing of anti-fraud system and card systems, because security guys in the bank, they have their eyes, well, not really closed on that, but their eyes are too tight to notice a lot of things. So there are opportunities to outsource this, to test it objectively. And last but not least, you don't want to really just trust everything to your risk management. Try to map your fraud. How much exactly did you lose on this or that fraud? And after going through the first stage, when you know your current state, when you have all the tactics and techniques of attacks, you may want to take all your transactions and check and calculate what is suspected fraud, what is not fraud, what is fraud, and make a mask out of it, a mask to overlay on all your transactions to understand how much you lose on each particular attack. And then they will say, okay, our risk management guys, this is X. This is how much we lose. Are you okay with that? Then it's okay. I mean, if you, the risk management team, are okay with that, then okay. Thank you for listening to me. My name is Timur Yunusov. Please address me in chat or use my email address to forward me questions. Thank you.